Hello, this is Eric and Aaron doing another episode on this series of This is Rural Korea. In this episode, I'd like to talk a little bit about traveling in rural Korea. I know when I first came to Korea, the things that frightened me the most were how to get from point A to point B. Now, luckily, I lived in Seoul when I first came to Korea, so we had the transportation system, the mass transit transportation system. So I could get on subways and I could get on city buses, and even those were scary to me. But even more frightening would be traveling to rural Korea, because in rural Korea, making simple mistakes, for example, which bus you took, could get you into very strange locations, and you might be waiting hours for the next bus to come. So I want to talk a little bit about what transportation is like in rural Korea. So the first thing is getting in and out of, a town or a township. Now, most UPs, which are towns, they have a centralized bus station, and they generally have quite a number of buses. Like, for example, in Hapcheon, we have buses that run to Seoul and from Seoul, starting at maybe 8 in the morning, and they go approximately every 2 hours, and I think the last one is at 6 p.m. That would take you to Seoul. And that would arrive in Seoul a little bit after 10. So you can generally, in towns in rural Korea, get to another major city during normal hours during the day. And the only thing that would be an issue would be you do have to wait maybe anywhere from 2 to 3 hours between the buses leaving. And where it gets challenging is if you want to go from Hapcheon to another small area. That gets complicated because these towns, there's not enough money for the bus companies to run buses to every other small town. So we have buses that run to all the towns and townships that are around this area, but we don't have buses that run to other counties, towns, or townships. So in order for that, you would have to travel to another major city, get into their busing system, and then travel to those other small towns. And that's one thing I have personally noticed when I've wanted to socialize, whether it's for board gaming or meeting up with other foreigners, is that we realize, oh my goodness, we're only an hour away from each other by car. But maybe I don't want to drive a car, or for whatever reason, I want to take a bus, but yet we're so close but so far, because I can't there's no bus that directly goes to them. I have to get to a city, and then from that city get onto a bus. So what would have been an hour car trip or an hour direct bus trip actually turns out to be a 3-hour trip, maybe up to 3-hour trip, to get to those locations. So it's really easy to get to the cities, but not so easy to get to the other smaller areas. Now, traveling around in a county or in Hapcheon, because I know Hapcheon, is somewhat not too challenging by bus, but you gotta deal with a lot of oddities. The buses don't operate like a city bus would operate. Like, for example, the bus drivers, they might skip stops because they don't know anyone is at that stop. Sometimes the stops are not labeled. Certainly, there's no audio system telling you what stop is coming up when you travel between the smaller areas. So you have to be a lot more vigilant as a foreigner, especially if your Korean ability maybe is not fluent. You definitely want to be aware of where you're traveling to. I have heard a number of stories from foreigners who first came to Hapcheon who got lost for an hour or two taking the inter-township and town buses because the bus driver, obviously they don't speak any English, and they got confused about what stop, and all of a sudden they're out in the middle of nowhere and they don't even see a bus station. And that has happened a few times. But if you're researched, you can do it. The other thing is those buses that go to some of the smaller areas, sometimes they're very infrequent. Certainly, there's almost always a work bus. So in that 8 to 9 a.m. time slot, there's always a bus that runs because there are workers that need to get out to those locations, including like teachers, public officers, etc. So they'll always have that. But it seems like in the afternoon time is when you'll have some problems. I know there are some teachers in this area that catch rides from Korean teachers to get back to Hapcheon because the bus has some weird schedule picking people up. And then buses just, sometimes they don't do what you expect them to do because they don't run quite on the same schedules. So that's about traveling. I'm lucky to have a car or cars, and I would probably recommend anyone wanting to live in rural Korea for more than 2 years, I think it would be worth it to invest in a used car, because once you have the used car with a navigator, it makes life a bajillion times easier. Even if you never use that car to travel to a big city, you only use that car to travel around the region, it would make a life a lot more easy to do that. Next, I'll talk about traveling inside the county. This is where I got a lot of nice things to say about living in Hapcheon and living in a town. Now, because we have a population of about 11 to 12,000, we don't have like a major big store, but it's enough people that you have restaurants, you have stores, you have grocery stores, you have convenience stores. And so you have a lot of what you would need on any given day. Like, if you just had a hankering for some wine and cheese and you hadn't planned ahead, that would be a problem. But if you need eggs, milk, and bread, that's not a problem. You have plenty of the basic essentials in a town. And as it relates to traveling, the thing I like is once you're in a town, you don't need a car at all. You can walk everywhere because it's very condensed for us. So I can walk to work. I can walk to any school. I can walk to the grocery store. It takes me, if I went from furthest point to furthest point in the town, it might be a 15-minute walk. But generally, most of my walks are about a 5-minute walk to anywhere in the town. And I really like that because I don't deliberately live my life to be green, especially, but I do kind of feel like it's nice that I don't have to use a car. Frankly, if I didn't have children, I probably could get away with not having a car 95% of the time. Because if I didn't have children, when I went to cities, I would just take the bus because it's a lot more convenient and you can sleep, you don't have to drive. But I have children, so need the car. So in terms of traveling, once you're inside of a town, it's really nice. It's calm, peaceful, there's not traffic jams, and it's very easy to get around. So I think I've talked mostly about the benefits, but the benefits I would say are definitely things are close together, and it is very pedestrian friendly once you're inside of a town. The challenges, the negative side of it is that you're a lot more schedule bound because there's not the volume of buses running that you would have in a big city. And also it's a little bit frustrating because, if you went to one of the big bus stations in Seoul, they have like a bus that goes almost anywhere in Korea. Whereas if you're in a town, it's a very limited selection of where the buses run. And if you want to go to some locations, you'll have to take 2 or maybe even 3 buses to get to the proper bus stations that get you to your final destination. So this is Eric and Aaron, and I hope I've broadly covered all the issues surrounding transportation in rural Korea. And this is rural Korea.